The last thing I expected to hear as I stood outside my home was the screech of tires on the asphalt. In an instant, my world flipped upside down, and I found myself lying on the ground, groceries scattered everywhere, my body screaming in pain. I had been hit by a car. As I tried to make sense of what had just happened, I was horrified to realize that the driver was none other than my mother-in-law, Lauren. Later, lying in the hospital bed, trying to manage the pain, the phone rang. It was my husband, Jeremy, sounding frantic. "Rachel, you need to tell the police you just fell. Someone's saying they saw Mom hit you with the car. Can you believe it?" His words hit harder than the impact of the car itself. Not only had Lauren run me over, but now Jeremy and his parents were trying to cover it up. As I listened to his desperate rambling, my mind drifted back to the early days of our relationship. When we first met at the office, where Jeremy was assigned to be my mentor, he wasn't exactly charming. But over time, his steady presence won me over. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but it felt solid. After we got married, things changed quickly. I left my job and moved into his parents' home, a decision I regretted almost immediately. Living with Lauren and her husband, Noah, turned out to be a daily battle. Lauren, with her sharp tongue and relentless criticism, made sure to remind me of my role as a wife and homemaker. "You should be grateful to Jeremy," she would say, her voice dripping with superiority. "You're living a comfortable life because of him." Noah wasn't as vocal, but his outdated views on women were equally demeaning. Every day was a reminder of how much I didn't belong. My marriage to Jeremy began to crumble. He took his parents' side more often than not, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. "They're old. You need to be more understanding," he would say, brushing off my feelings. As time went on, the distance between us grew. Our dreams of having children slowly faded, and the pressure from Lauren and Noah to produce grandchildren became unbearable. Yet Jeremy remained detached, lost in his own world, indifferent to both our struggles and the demands of his parents. During those difficult times, my only comfort came from my neighbor, Cheryl, and her husband, Tyler. Cheryl had been through her own battles and became my confidant and a source of strength. She knew the truth behind the facade of my marriage. Behind the perfect image, there was a crumbling relationship, and Cheryl helped me hold on during those tough times. As I lay in the hospital bed, Jeremy's voice snapped me back to the present. "Rachel, you need to do this for us, for the family," he begged. But something inside me had changed. I couldn't continue being the submissive wife, always bending to their will. I had been hit both literally and figuratively by the weight of their twisted family dynamics. And now I realized I could no longer be their victim. I hung up the phone, a new sense of determination building inside me. They had crossed a line, and it was time for them to face the consequences. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up against the unfairness that had controlled my life for too long. Lying there in the calm, sterile hospital room, my thoughts were anything but peaceful. My body ached from the injuries, but the deeper pain came from the betrayal of the people I once called family. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room as Cheryl, my neighbor and friend, walked in. Her face was filled with concern. "Rachel, how are you feeling?" she asked gently, sitting beside my bed. Her voice was soft, but I could see the anger in her eyes. "I've been better," I said, trying to force a smile. "What did the police say?" Cheryl's expression grew serious. "At first, they believed the story about your fall. But I told them what I saw Lauren driving out of the garage like she was in a race, right before I found you on the ground." I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. "Jeremy wants me to lie to protect them." Cheryl reached out and squeezed my hand. "You can't let them get away with this, Rachel. It's not just about the accident, it's about everything. The years of manipulation, the control. This is your chance to break free." Her words hit me hard. For years, I had endured Lauren's cutting remarks, Noah's dismissive attitude, and Jeremy's constant siding with them. I had lived under the weight of their control, always trying to keep the peace, always bending to their will. It was a never-ending cycle of humiliation and frustration. But now, something had shifted in me. As Cheryl and I talked, a plan started to take shape in my mind, a plan not just for justice, but for retribution. It was time for Lauren and her family to face the consequences of their actions. The next day, a police officer came to take my statement. I told him everything, from the moment Lauren hit me to Jeremy's desperate attempt to cover it up. As I spoke, I felt the weight of years of suffering lifting off my shoulders. The officer listened closely, taking notes as I described the betrayal I had endured. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "We have enough to bring them in for questioning. We'll need to investigate further, but your testimony is crucial." I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a legal process, it was the first step toward reclaiming my life. As the days passed, my determination only grew stronger. Cheryl visited me regularly, keeping me updated on the investigation's progress. She told me that the community was rallying around me, offering support and expressing outrage at what had happened. I was touched by their kindness. I had felt so alone for so long, but now I realized I wasn't fighting this battle on my own. I also learned that Tyler, Cheryl's husband, had been reviewing footage from their home security camera, which was aimed toward our driveway. He thought it might have captured something useful. The idea that we might have proof that Lauren intentionally hit me sparked a glimmer of hope inside me. If we could prove it, it would be the undeniable evidence we needed to hold her accountable. With each passing day, my body grew stronger. But more than that, I felt a deep sense of healing from within. This wasn't just about recovering from the physical injuries, it was about reclaiming my power, my voice, and my life. I had spent too long living in the shadow of their control, but now, for the first time in years, I felt free. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I had spent enough time being silent, enduring their manipulations. Now, it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. And for me, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer be the victim of their twisted family dynamics. I was ready to stand up for myself and, finally, take back control of my life. I was no longer the quiet, defeated woman suffering in silence. I had been wronged, and now I was ready to fight back, to expose the twisted truth behind those who had oppressed me for so long. As I sat in the small, cold room at the police station, waiting for the Atom, my hands trembled not from fear, but from a mix of anger and anticipation. The door finally opened, and Adam Brody entered, his expression serious, holding a file in his hand. "We've reviewed the footage from your neighbor's security camera," he said, placing the file on the table in front of me. "It clearly shows Lauren's car hitting you. There's no doubt it's unmistakable." A wave of relief washed over me. The truth was out, and it was undeniable. But that relief quickly gave way to something stronger, a burning desire for justice. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice steady, but filled with determination. "We're bringing them in for questioning today," Adam Brody replied. "Your husband too. They'll all have to answer for this." As I left the police station, my mind raced with thoughts. It wasn't enough for them to simply be questioned or exposed. They needed to face the full consequences of their actions. I had been their victim for too long now. They had to feel the weight of what they had done. Later that day, Cheryl called with an update. The police took Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy in for questioning. "The whole neighborhood is talking about it. People can't believe what Lauren did." The news had spread quickly, sparking a wave of shock and disgust from those who had once held the family in high regard. But for me, it was a moment of vindication. The years of silent suffering were over, and the truth was finally out. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, I imagined Lauren's face as she was confronted with her actions. The once powerful, domineering woman would now be forced to face the consequences of her lies and deceit. It was a scene I had played out in my mind many times before, each time giving me a small sense of victory. But it wasn't just Lauren who needed to be held accountable. Jeremy's betrayal had cut just as deeply. He had chosen to protect his parents instead of standing by me, his wife. He had chosen their lies over truth and decency. Now he needed to understand the full gravity of his choice. A few days later, I was discharged from the hospital. My body still ached, but my spirit remained unbroken. Cheryl and Tyler were there to greet me, their faces filled with concern and determination. "Rachel, we're with you in this, no matter what," Tyler said, his voice strong and reassuring. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I had support, and I had the strength to face whatever was coming next. That evening, I sat in Cheryl's living room, watching the news. The story of my accident and the ongoing investigation had made the local headlines. Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy's faces flashed across the screen, their reputations in tatters. The family that had once been admired was now the subject of scandal and outrage. It felt surreal, seeing it all play out on the news. For so long, I had been the one suffering in the shadows, enduring their cruelty without anyone knowing. Now, the truth was out for everyone to see. And as I watched their downfall unfold, I realized this was only the beginning. They had to answer for what they did, not just to me, but to everyone they had deceived. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. As I sat there with Cheryl and Tyler, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But I was no longer the silent sufferer. I was ready to take my life back, to stand up for myself, and to make sure they felt the full weight of their actions. And with each step I took, I grew stronger, more determined, and more certain that I was finally reclaiming my power. My private pain had turned into a public spectacle, but I didn't feel any sympathy for them. This was the beginning of their downfall, a downfall they had brought upon themselves. The tension in the interrogation room was thick as I sat across from Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy. Their faces were a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. Adam Brody sat next to me, his presence a comforting reminder that justice was finally at work. "You understand why you're here," Adam Brody began, looking directly at them. "The evidence is clear, Lauren. You hit Rachel with your car and fled the scene. Noah, you were a witness and chose to remain silent. And Jeremy, you tried to cover it all up." Lauren's face was tight with defiance, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "It was an accident," she said, her voice shaky. "I never meant to hit her." Noah kept his gaze glued to the table, saying nothing, while Jeremy's face flushed with guilt and embarrassment. He looked at his mother, his voice cracking as he finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you stop? Why did you run?" The reality of the situation seemed to finally be sinking in for him. I sat there, looking at all three of them, my heart hardened by years of mistreatment. "You could have killed me, Lauren. And all you cared about was saving yourselves." That was when Lauren's composure broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed. I was scared. I panicked. For the first time, Noah spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "We were wrong. We should never have lied." Adam Brody turned to Jeremy. "And you, Jeremy, you tried to twist the story, even asking your wife to lie for you. How do you justify that?" Jeremy's response was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I wanted to protect my parents." A surge of disgust rose within me. Jeremy had chosen his parents over the truth, over me. "You didn't just betray me, Jeremy," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You betrayed everything we ever had." Adam Brody nodded, his expression grim. "You will all face charges for your actions. This is a serious matter." As we left the interrogation room, a wave of closure washed over me. They had been exposed for who they truly were. Lauren, once so dominant and controlling, now stood as a coward, hiding behind her tears. Noah, who had always stayed silent, had revealed himself as an accomplice to his wife's crime. And Jeremy, blinded by loyalty to his parents, had lost sight of everything right and true. When I stepped out of the police station, the world outside felt different. The air seemed fresher, the sky more open. I had finally confronted the people who had held me down for so long, and now I was free to start building my future. Cheryl and Tyler were waiting for me, their faces full of concern and pride. "You were incredible in there," Cheryl said, her voice warm and supportive. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of relief and strength I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just about getting justice for the accident, it was about freeing myself from the chains of the past. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. The weight of Lauren, Jeremy, and Noah's control had finally been lifted, and now I was ready to live my life on my own terms. I thanked Cheryl and Tyler, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for their constant support. In the weeks that followed, the legal proceedings against Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy began. The news of their arraignment spread throughout the community, stirring up various reactions. Some people were shocked, while others expressed disappointment. But for me, it was a validation of the long struggle I had endured in silence. During this difficult time, I stayed with Cheryl and Tyler. They didn't just give me a place to stay, they provided a warm and nurturing environment, a space where I could begin to heal. Their kindness was a sharp contrast to the years of cold indifference I had experienced while living with Jeremy and his parents. One evening, as we sat in Cheryl's cozy living room, Tyler shared some important news. "The prosecutor's office called," he said. "Lauren and Noah are facing serious charges. Jeremy, too, for his role in the cover-up." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet sense of satisfaction. They were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But then Cheryl looked at me, with concern in her eyes. "What about you, Rachel?" she asked softly. "What are you going to do now?" I took a deep breath, a sense of clarity washing over me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm filing for divorce," I said firmly. "I can't stay with someone who chose his parents over me, even in such a serious situation." Cheryl squeezed my hand, her silent support speaking volumes. She didn't need to say anything, I knew she understood. The divorce process moved quickly, mainly because of Jeremy's guilt and the overwhelming evidence against him. I received a significant settlement, which was a small consolation for the years of emotional pain I had suffered. With that money, I decided to start over. I rented a modest apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild my life on my own terms, without the shadow of Jeremy or his family hanging over me. Cheryl and Tyler were instrumental in helping me begin this new chapter of my life. Tyler, who owned a small business, offered me a job. "You've got the skills and experience, Rachel. We'd be lucky to have you," he said, his offer genuine and full of warmth. I accepted eagerly, ready to regain my independence and re-enter a world I had been shut out of for far too long. As I settled into my new job, I began to find a sense of peace and purpose that had been missing from my life for years. Working alongside Cheryl and Tyler, I rediscovered parts of myself that I had long forgotten. I was no longer just Jeremy's wife, downtrodden and overlooked. I was Rachel, a woman with her own strength, identity, and a future that was finally in my control. Months passed, and the day of the trial's verdict finally arrived. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt a mixture of emotions: nervousness, relief, and a quiet sense of triumph. It had been a long road, full of pain and heartache, but I had made it through. Now, as I waited for the judge to deliver the final verdict, I realized that this moment was about more than just the outcome of the trial. It was about reclaiming my life, about standing up for myself after years of being silenced. Whatever the decision, I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer the victim of their lies and control. I was free. I felt a sense of closure as I sat in the courtroom, watching Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy seated across from me. Their faces were etched with anxiety and regret. The judge's voice echoed through the solemn room as he delivered the verdict. "In light of the evidence presented, this court finds Lauren and Noah Gill guilty of hit and run and obstruction of justice. Jeremy Gill is found guilty of aiding in the cover-up." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the sentences were announced. Lauren and Noah were sentenced to prison, while Jeremy received community service and probation. I watched as their faces crumbled, the reality of their fate sinking in. This was the moment they had to face the consequences of their actions. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Cheryl and Tyler joined me, their presence a comforting reminder of the support that had carried me through this entire ordeal. "Justice has been served," Cheryl said softly, her voice filled with relief. "Yes, but at what cost?" I replied, thinking of all the years lost and the pain I had endured. The news of the sentencing spread quickly. Lauren, once a respected member of our community, was now a convicted felon. Noah, her silent accomplice, shared her fate. And Jeremy, the man I had once loved, had become someone who betrayed his own wife to protect his deceitful parents. In the weeks following the trial, I felt a change within myself. The heavy weight of the past began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. For so long, my life had been controlled by Lauren and Jeremy, but now it was mine to shape. Working at Tyler's company brought me new challenges, and I thrived in the supportive environment. My confidence grew with each day, and Cheryl was by my side, encouraging me to embrace this new chapter in my life. The biggest surprise came when I least expected it. At a company event, I met Frank, one of Tyler's colleagues. He was kind, respectful, and saw me for who I truly was, not for my past. Our friendship grew, and before long, it blossomed into a romance. Within a year, we were married in a simple ceremony, a celebration of new beginnings and healing. Frank knew about my past, about the pain, betrayal, and heartbreak, but that only made our bond stronger. As I stood beside him on our wedding day, looking into his loving eyes, I realized what a true partnership looked like. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding everything my marriage to Jeremy had lacked. A year passed since the trial, and life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Frank and I had moved into a cozy house, a place we could truly call our own. The scars of my past, with Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy, had begun to fade, replaced by the love and contentment that now filled my days. One evening, as Frank and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, he turned to me with a gentle smile. "You know, Rachel, I admire your strength. What you went through, it's unimaginable. But here you are, stronger and happier." His words touched me deeply. I smiled back, feeling grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The struggles I had faced were real and painful, but they had also shaped me into the person I was now, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. As I looked out at the horizon, I knew that my life had truly begun anew, filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. I leaned against Frank, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "I couldn't have made it without friends like Cheryl and Tyler, and without you," I said, my heart filled with gratitude. We started talking about the future, about dreams and plans that were yet to unfold. The pain and drama of the past no longer held me back. Instead, they were stepping stones that led me to this moment of peace. From time to time, I heard updates about Lauren, Noah, and Jeremy. Lauren and Noah were serving their prison sentences, living with the consequences of their actions every day. Jeremy, on the other hand, struggled to rebuild his life. His betrayal had isolated him, and the community's knowledge of what he had done left him filled with regret. Although I had moved on, there was a small part of me that felt a bitter satisfaction in seeing them face the results of their choices. They had finally reaped what they had sown, a fitting outcome for their behavior. As I looked back on my journey, I realized it was one of change. I had gone from being a victim of manipulation and lies to someone who stood up for herself, fought for justice, and reclaimed her life. Now, surrounded by love and support, I was ready to face whatever the future brought. The challenges and heartaches of my past had shaped me, but they no longer defined who I was. I was Rachel, a survivor, a woman who found her happiness despite everything that happened. The story of my past would always be a part of me, but it was the story of my present and future that excited me the most. It was a story of love, strength, and new joy.